All right, we now welcome on Preston Johnson, also known on Twitter as Sports Cheetah. He's got a daily show, Last Word Cheetah, with Bets Media. Preston, how are you?
I'm doing well. Thanks for having me on. I appreciate the invite.
Yeah, of
So,
course. So, Connor, take it
yeah,
away.
Preston, first question here. Sports Cheetah is the nickname. How did that come to be? That's a very unique nickname.
It is. It was really random. My eventual wife and I, some friends of ours, went down to Vegas for March Madness. And we did that a few years straight. We would just watch games in the sports book, bet on them. And at the time, like my friends were like betting like maybe $5, $10 a game. But we went on, basically they were betting what I was betting. We went on like a 5 game winning streak. I recall George Mason winning outright as a pretty low seed as an upset. And just one of my friends randomly blurted out, "Oh, the sports cheetah." And I was just like, didn't even make sense, but like we just ran with it. Then fast forward like 2 more years, it never came up again. And I was writing a blog for Todd Furman. He used to do a blog called Todd's Takes, I believe. And I wrote an article for him there. And he said, "What Twitter handle do you want to use?" And I didn't want to use my like personal handle. That was just my name. So I like thought of another one that was related to sports betting. And I remembered, hey, remember when my buddy Steve called me the sports cheetah during that thing in Vegas? So I just ran with it. It was available. And I guess the rest is history. But honestly, there's no real cool meaning behind it, or I'm not trying to be an animal. It just
Yeah.
was my friend and the only thing I thought of when I was trying to create another Twitter handle.
So, I saw online you majored in sports psychology.
I did. Yep, that's true. Some
So,
people don't believe it, but I do. I have a certificate. I have a master's degree in
from
sports.
BYU or the U?
No. Yeah, so BYU is my undergrad, which I believe I saw the Mormon money line in your bio on Twitter. So we might have some connections there. But yeah, sports psychology isn't offered as like a major. It's just you undergrad in psychology, and then it's an option for a master's or PhD. And I went up to the University of Utah. Really, at the time, outside of Utah, I think the University of Washington, they're really like West Coast wise, wasn't a ton offering that particular degree for a master's or a PhD. Most were in the SEC, coincidentally, and maybe a few more on the East Coast. And I wanted to stay West. Plus, I had at that point in-state tuition, so it was relatively affordable to go up to University of Utah and do that there. So undergrad psychology, master's in sports psychology. I actually started my PhD, and then I decided with sports betting stuff going pretty well that I didn't need to keep going to school. And so I decided not to. And fortunately, it worked out. But theoretically, I did a little more work in school than I needed to.
So, how early on did you get into sports betting? Like maybe an age, and then also banking off that, what made you decide to like follow that seriously and like make a show about it?
Sure. I can give you the exact time I thought of it. So very first and foremost, age, I started playing poker a ton in high school during the Chris Moneymaker boom in 2003. And I did pretty well. And I realized like there was definitely a skill to it that could be capitalized, or, you could take advantage of. I started like when you turn 18, you could sign notes in high school, like doctor's notes, or I was going to the orthodontist and we would drive to like Santa Barbara. Up behind Santa Barbara in Southern California, there was a Chumash Indian Resort casino you could play if you were 18. We'd go play tournaments on Fridays and just ditch school. And I mean, it was bad. I don't recommend that to anybody, especially if you have parents like mine. But that's what got me into just like the whole space in general and finding advantages and exploiting them. And so I did that. I played online for a while. And then when Black Friday hit a few years down the line and we couldn't play online anymore in the United States, I wasn't like going to move. Like I had some friends move to Mexico or to Canada or to Europe to keep playing online. I was going to school at the time. I wanted to finish school. I also had a girlfriend, or maybe was even married by then, and was like, all right, I have a family. We're not just going to pick up and move, out of the country. So I had a bankroll from poker. I was able to kind of apply to what I loved, which was sports anyway, and betting. And it took me a year or two to really, I think, figure out how to bet consistently with an advantage. And luckily with kind of the bankroll management that I already had from grinding poker stuff online, I was able to apply. And so I never like went bust. Like I had this allotted bankroll and I never fortunately was in a spot where I think a lot of people, they start trying to bet, they chase or something and just gets out of control. And then they're like back at square one or, base zero. They have to figure it out again and go from there and try again down the road. So I think that's where kind of my edge lied when I was starting, is that I just at least had some sound principles to how I was approaching it. So even in the bad streaks or runs, whatever it was, I was still in pretty good shape. So that answers your first question. The second one was a time where I decided to just go for it. It really was right after I wrote that article, and I had a Twitter handle there. I wrote the article. I got a few hundred followers, maybe like 200, 250 followers, just because of the eyes that were there. So right when that happened, I decided I should start posting my plays on the Twitter handle. And literally some of the first tweets on my account, I guess if people went back and looked at the history, are just me posting bets. And the first 16 I ever posted all won. And it was just an unreal run. I've never matched it. And this was all public. Like a few of them were underdogs, like a plus 183 Oakland A's, I remember, that hit, and a couple or so. It was like 16-0 plus 19 units. And then I finally did lose one. And then I won like 3 or 6 straight again after that. So I was just on an unbelievable run. Wow. Most I've ever won in a row since was 15, and then like 13 once and 11. Like I've never gotten to 16 since. But at that point, I had like 3,000 followers in about like a week and a half. And everyone wanted to follow what I was talking about and betting. And fortunately, what was interesting, the timing of that, I remember, was like May and June. It was during baseball and NBA playoffs. I actually, because I was working in sports psychology, I had friends in BYU, Utah. I had a particular friend that had cousins working as assistant coaches. And that particular season, there were a few injuries to quarterbacks on both teams that led to me having some pretty valuable info that I was first to basically put public. And we took advantage of it betting. I remember Utah like +7 money line on the under in a BYU Utah game that year. And everyone, just was winning money. And like, it was just one of those runs that I could never really duplicate it for about half of a year. And so kind of just all went from there. And I actually still, I think, did another semester or two of school. And one full year of like, I'm going to do my PhD. And then I just decided with some content I started doing and little TV shows or video clips or podcasts or radio spots, it was a lot more fun than writing research papers and doing studies. Even though it was sports psychology, I still think it's fascinating. It was easy to kind of change gears.
So you never had your come to Jesus moment gambling?
I mean, I could tell you a real story.
Go right on ahead.
I've never shared this one, and we're having some fun, so why not? So people, like, they hear BYU. So I'm religious. I grew up super conservative. My parents were super strict, right? So I remember the first time I got caught driving to Chumash in Santa Barbara and playing poker. And all I'm talking about are the good runs. But this is, I remember I worked at a buddy of mine's brother was the manager at like Sbarro Pizza in the mall. And I freaking made pizzas in high school. Senior year, I got to work that day and I wasn't on the sheet. I thought I was. I had confused the schedule. So I got there, which I think normally I'd go in and prep maybe 10 or 11 a.m. And I was like, my parents think I'm working for the next 8 hours. Why wouldn't I go play cards and go drive over and play? So I took some money, went, played at Chumash. I just played 1-2 no limit hold'em at the time, 2-5 no limit hold'em at the time. I'd buy in for $100 or $200. And it was an era in poker, for people that are familiar with it, that just was 7 people at the table had no clue. And the one person maybe that the other person at the table that did, you just stay away from playing hands with them. And it was so easy to beat. I remember running it up, probably my 200 to like 1,300. I remember thinking, this is great. I still have a few more hours and I'll drive back home. And honestly, and this part has never happened again in my life. And I lived in Vegas for 5 years. I'd meet people that want to just DJ on the blackjack table or play craps or whatever it is. I sat down at a blackjack table, which I usually wouldn't play just because I understood, like, I don't have an edge, but I was up like over $1,000 and I'm in high school and I'm like, this is the greatest thing ever.
Yeah.
I sat down with $100. I was just betting $5 a hand. The pit boss that's in the suit just walks up and takes over for one of the dealers, like taps her out. And generally when that happens, it's because he's like covering for someone's late for a shift. I'm not sure the reason to this day why. I was sitting at first base, so I was first to act. I was the first that he would deal cards to. And I still have no reason why he did this, but I think I had a black chip and then like a few reds because I maybe was up 15 or $20. And he's like, just bet the black chip on this one. And I was like, excuse me? He's like, bet the black chip. He just kind of said it like kind of quieter, like under his breath, just like kind of nodding towards me. And I trusted him, which I don't think I would have done. if I wasn't up like 1,000 from poker. So I put the black chip out and it wins. And I pull it back and I was like, thanks, man. Nice call. And I go back to like $5 or $10 a hand. And he's like, no, put it back out again. And the shoe just went on an unreal heater. And the next thing I know, like 10, 15 minutes later, he's switching with someone else on a shift. And I was up like $3,300. I was like a high school kid who maybe had won a few $100 before. I remember I got third in a tournament once for like 800 or 900. But this was like a lot of money. And I was like, okay, holy cow. They had someone come and like comp me dinner too. And they were like, hey, you want to go get dinner? I was like, sure, like I'll get dinner. So as I'm sitting there eating my free dinner, I'm like, this is the greatest life ever. Back in the day, it was not a cell phone that was mobile like this with a lot of battery. It was a flip phone. At this point, I was like, well, maybe I should go play poker again. Like this run, like so good. Like, why would I leave? But I need to like make up an excuse so my parents don't know that I'm playing at Chumash right now and playing and gambling by myself. I actually didn't even go with friends. Like everyone else had jobs or were working or whatever. So I was just by myself. And I set up some sort of diversion where I said, after work, I'm going to go play basketball with some friends. And after that, I'm going to go to my buddy's house. I'm going to spend the night. I had it all set up. My phone was like blinking. It died. But I was like, it doesn't matter. Like, I'll be back by morning. All will be well. I can plug it in when I get to my friend's house or in my car even. I think I maybe had some sort of funky car chargers. Anyway, I know this is a long story, but it's good. Especially you'll appreciate it because you have the LDS tie. I go and I do play more poker. I sit down. I don't know why. I was like, I'm just going to play. It's only $200 buy-in. And honestly, I think I actually did win a little bit more, but it wasn't anything crazy. But all of a sudden, maybe 2 hours later, I heard over the intercom in the entire casino, I heard, Preston Johnson, will you please come down to like the front service desk? And I was just like, oh shit, this can't be good. I've never heard of something like this happening. I still have never heard anyone's name really called like that, unless like you have a vehicle maybe in the resort in Vegas that's beeping or whatever. So I go down and they're like, hey, your dad's on the line. And like my heart sunk. I was like, oh crap. So they needed me to get something in the morning for my sister who had some like gymnastics, something or other. And they had just tried to call me quick to tell me about it. But my phone wasn't answering because it had died. So like, oh, well, he's at so-and-so's house. So they call so-and-so. Oh, Preston's not there. So they had to like really try to figure out, talk to a bunch of my friends and find out where I was. Obviously I had been showboating and showing off and bragging to my friends. Hey, I'm up $4,600. I'm at Chumash. So a couple of them knew where I was. They told my parents. Anyway, my dad's like, don't drive home right now. Cause I think at this point it was midnight, 1 a.m. I don't even think they knew I would drive on the freeway. I was still like driving my dad's car and wasn't supposed to be driving very far. So I stayed the night, drove back in the morning, but no joke. And again, another to this day moment. The bank opens at 9 a.m. I'm driving back in. I'm like, hey, I have all this money. I'm going to deposit into my bank. I'm going to say that I made like $500 to $1,000. I'll keep like $1,000 on me. Why does an 18-year-old in high school need $1,000 cash on him? No reason. I have no clue why. I deposit the rest. I get home and magically my dad had this list of things I needed to start paying him for, like rent, gas on the car, insurance on the car. There was a couple other things. Oh, like new brake pads that coincidentally added up to like $1,000 because when I got home, they asked how much money I had on me.
This sounds very LDS, by the way.
Yeah, of course it does. Now here's the coolest part. Does this part make sense? So they're trying to teach me a lesson, right? Mm-hmm. Obviously, gambling can be bad. You want to do it responsibly, all of that. And there's like this 18-year-old kid of theirs that's been playing poker and blackjack or whatever else. So my dad, I grew up very comfortable and blessed. So for him, money, like he was also really conservative with money as well as life, but he didn't need the $1,000 himself. And so he's like, well, I'm going to teach you a lesson. And no joke, I remember to this day, he takes the $1,000. They were all in hundreds because I just got back from the casino. He puts it in the fireplace and he lights it on fire and it just burns up right in front of my face. He's like, I'm going to teach you a lesson. This is what money means to me. And I just watched $1,000 burn up. And then that I had paid him for these things that he wouldn't have charged me for anyway. And then he takes the ashes and like puts them in a Ziploc, and he's like, now you can remember this. Something like that. It was the wildest thing. So that was my, like you said, coming to Jesus moment. I was like, holy cow, like they're trying to put me on the right path. But also I went down that path anyway. Now here we are. And so that's kind of like one of the, like, I guess, setups where I did really well early on. Otherwise, if I was losing, and like, I mean, I never would have just continued. But there were really big advantages to be had in poker back then in 2003 through like 2006. So I tried to maximize them and just kept playing. But that was a story that I've never actually told. So it hit me when you said coming to Jesus moment. And that's like the one gambling moment that just still sticks out in my mind because he lit $1,000 on fire.
That's hilarious. But the only difference with me is my dad would have probably just kept $1,000 and bought a used Ford Ranger or something,
or gambled it behind your back.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Oh my gosh.
So you're at ESPN. How was your time there?
It was good, man. So yeah, I was doing my own thing. I had started doing a podcast myself for fun. I was living in Vegas, betting on sports, and I got a random tweet from someone that I actually thought maybe wasn't even real, saying like, "Hey, I'm with ESPN. We're going to launch a new show. I had no other way to contact you. Like, reach out." I was like, okay, well, this is like it might even have been an egg account.
Yeah.
I thought it was fake. Sure enough, it wasn't. She then gives me her name and email address to reach out. They were flying in the next day to interview like 12 people for this new show. She's like, we just keep hearing about this cheetah guy. I finally decided we should reach out while we're there just in case and meet up with him. And that's you, right? I was like, yeah, I'm Preston's my real name. You don't have to call me Cheetah. I actually kind of dislike it at this point, but it is what it is. But I met him the next day, and about a week later, they called me back and just said like, hey, we really liked you. We want to fly you out to Bristol to meet some other people that are going to be in charge of launching this new show. We still need to get the green light from Disney, which I think ended up taking like another 7 or 8 months before the show was officially good to go. But I just kind of was waiting that out. And it was really a really good learning experience. I had no TV experience, so I appreciated that they took a shot on me for that reason. But I think they liked that I was more analytical, actually had been betting, and that I was younger versus a lot of like the media guys in Vegas doing sports betting coverage. They're older, and a lot of them are just kind of media guys that cover sports betting, but maybe they're not actually betting themselves very frequently, or at least not for too much. So it was good. And then when 2 years came up, honestly, the COVID stuff was really weird because we had a few months off with no sports, and going from betting professionally where I was putting in 60, 70 plus hour weeks anyways, modeling and scraping stuff, keeping up to date on whatever, football, basketball, baseball, all the different leagues, professional, college, like it was really exhausting anyways. And then for ESPN, they're like, hey, come do a TV show 6 days a week and write 3 or 4 articles a week. And so I felt like I was doing 2 different jobs, which they paid me like I was their full-time employee. So they expected it, and I have nothing against that. But I realized just when we had that break because of COVID for a few months, no sports, I wanted to prioritize my flexibility going forward. I also wanted to kind of prioritize family. The Kobe thing had just happened. I'm a Kobe fan. I'm from LA. We got a jersey back there for those that are viewing. And that was just kind of like, had like rocked me a little. And so moved back down towards family in Southern California. And then when my contract was up after 2 years, they did, contrary to some belief out there, offer me another job, but they didn't kick me off the show for being terrible. I was at least okay. But I was like, you know what? I'm going to do some other things. Built out a studio locally, doing my own daily show now, which you alluded to earlier, Last Word Cheetah, a couple other shows as well. But I also wanted to kind of put some time into the NFT and crypto space with some opportunities there. So I've been really focused on that as well since February. But that's kind of the rundown. But ESPN was great. No hard feelings either direction. And I was like, forever grateful, and dream job for a kid, talking sports on television.
Sounds like definitely a great experience. So Carter, if it's okay with you, we can go and get into some college football.
One last question. When the show first started, was it awkward? You're like, I'm talking gambling on ESPN. This is weird, right?
I think
because it looked weird. It looked weird to, like, I saw it, I was like, whoa, daily what?
Daily wager. It was like, I don't think it really hit me. I was probably too nervous to really like bring it in and like grasp that they're actually talking about gambling on national TV. I think Fox had also already been doing a show. I had watched a couple of times. and a lot of podcasts and stuff I've been listening to. For me, it was just so ingrained in how I was thinking and how I would listen to sports content and media. So it probably didn't graze me in that way. I think I'll tell you this, when I never really talked to my parents about it, they knew what I was doing at that point. But I told them, like, hey, I'm actually taking a job with ESPN. They're super supportive now, like over the top supportive, everything I've done and do. So I got to give them a shout out despite the crazy like money on fire story. But when they watched it the first time, my mom was just like, you're speaking a completely different language. Like I actually literally don't understand what I watched, but it sounded good. Like that was basically where they were at. So I think that was weird, I guess, for family members or closer friends that just hadn't been following and then we're listening and they're like, yeah, it is kind of weird, but also like no one understands what you guys are talking about. I was like, some people do, I promise. But I guess I just kind of was used to it at that point. So as far as viewing it from those eyes or those shoes, that's a fair perspective, though, that it was pretty brand new for the most of the public eye.
Mm-hmm. All right, I'm ready to get into some college football if you are, Connor.
Yeah, sure. So before we get into like team totals and stuff like that, the first thing I wanted to ask you is about the Heisman odds. Number one, who do you think is going to win the Heisman? And number two, what do you think the best value is? The best odds right now.
So value-wise, I'm not sure what the current prices are, to be completely honest, but I bet Matt Corral to win the Heisman. That's the only
Ole Miss,
the Ole Miss quarterback. And I can just look in my Telegram thread. One of the guys that I told to bet it, I'll just see what we actually got it at. I honestly don't remember if it was like 80-1. I'm pretty sure it was 50-1 and an 80-1, a mix.
Because right now it's down to 20-1.
Yeah, so when I did my show and we covered SEC about 6 or 7 weeks ago, it was 30-1, and I kind of said I wouldn't bet it at worse than that. So if it's 20-1 everywhere, I wouldn't take it anyways. But just the stats he's going to put up year two with Lane Kiffin's offense there. And I think really it's a bet on, can Ole Miss get to like 10 wins? Because the numbers are going to be there. And maybe they have, if you guys remember, they went drive for drive with Alabama last year. It came down to the final possession. They lost by 1 touchdown. Both teams scored in the 40s. They'll be able to do that with anybody, essentially. If they can now have that marquee nationally televised game where they actually win, maybe it's against Alabama. They have that, and it's a 9 or 10 win season, I think, with the numbers he's going to put up, which will be crazy, Lamar Jackson-esque. Maybe not on the ground, but he's going to throw away more. He'll be there. So I had to take a shot on it. But otherwise, as far as who I think is going to win, it's probably just who's the favorite right now? Do you guys have a list in front of you? I can pull it up too.
It looks like Rattler is.
Ooh, that's interesting. I do like Oklahoma for what it's worth at like 8-1 range or better.
There we go.
So I don't think I would go Rattler. I just think it was an interesting season last year for OU where they were basically rebuilding on their offensive side, completely offensive line. Rattler was a brand new quarterback as well. And then defensively, Alex Grinch has been pretty good since he got there. And they graded out really well. And if you go back to, Jalen Hurts and Kyler Murray and Baker Mayfield, Lincoln Riley's had these incredible quarterbacks, incredible offenses, even though they were still really good relative to those other offenses. They really dropped off last season. So I think now in year two with some more experience, a few transfers as well, and a defense that's better than any of those other three quarterbacks that we all know about in the NFL now, better defense than those teams have had. So I think that they're pretty likely to get through the Big 12, shot in the playoff, and at 8-1, I think, going into the season, I have them as my third best team in the country anyway, behind only Alabama and Clemson. So I don't think it's like too out of the box or anything, but for the price, I think it's worth a shot. So Rattler, I'm guessing similarly, then he would be up there if I like Oklahoma, and I think their offense is going to bounce back. I'm trying to pull up Heisman odds real quick in front of me at one shop. So give me 10 more seconds and I'll have them. It's just loading right now. Oh, there we go. So you have Young, Ugalele. JT Daniels is one I've seen a lot of people betting, and I am bullish Georgia as well. I think, he's a really high recruit, gets hurt at USC. He transfers over. They didn't think he was quite ready a year ago, so he didn't play at first last season. And then when he did play, their offense kind of went to another tier, another level. So if they can keep that offense there, a Kirby Smart defense is pretty set. Plus they had a transfer or two as well defensively. I think a Clemson linebacker that was all ACC. So they're primed. Now, granted, they have like a tight end and a few receivers that are missing practice right now, and they open against Clemson. So my thinking with Georgia and potentially JT Daniels is if they beat Clemson in week 1, then their prices are never going to be as good as you can get right now. If they lose, they're still in the SEC. They can make a run through the SEC, win it, and they're still going to get into the playoff, or Daniels will have a shot at a Heisman anyway. So that's how I would approach Georgia. Granted, this is when I first was talking about it a month and a half ago, and now there are some injury concerns now that these guys have been missing practice and no one knows who he's going to throw to. But hopefully we have a good game against Clemson and they can get back, because that's one of the games of the year, in my opinion, and it's just right out of the gate.
So what about –
you go ahead.
Yeah, just real quick. So I go to Chapel Hill, and I'm a big Heisman Howe guy. So are you
well, he's next, I think, on the list. He's like the 5th or 6th favorite, depending on the book.
I think he's 6, yeah. So what do you think about that? You think he has a shot to win it? And does Carolina deserve that top 10 preseason ranking right now?
I'm not going to be nice to you and just say yes. So
Thank you.
I'll tell you that they don't deserve to be top 10. I think they're maybe 14th or 15th in my ratings. I'm pulling them up on another tab now. I have them 14th. Them and Miami are essentially tied, like around where USC and Notre Dame are. Like they're all kind of grouped in a little tier for me there. So if you wanted to say they're top 13 through 16, I think that's where they deserve to be. Top 10, like with LSU, Oregon, Wisconsin. No, they're a few points worse than those teams, I believe, on a neutral. The Howell stuff. So, you're a North Carolina fan. They lost 2 receivers and 2 running backs, like, to the NFL. Yeah. And I think in college more so than pro, although it's becoming more systematic in the NFL as well, a system and a great QB can just be good and can make things happen. But when you lose like 4 guys that are NFL level talent, I'm concerned at what Howell will be able to do with new guys. Can they step up? So I wouldn't bet it personally. I think there's too many question marks where he can still have a great year, but he just doesn't have help. At some point, if you don't have a running game that's as efficient and you don't have receivers that are, getting open as frequently, or at least with not as much room or windows to throw in, like it's just going to be tougher on him. So I'm not sure I would look that direction, but I also don't think I don't hate him completely. I wouldn't bet their season win total. I think it's lined pretty fairly with the market. So I'm just staying away. All
right, let's talk about what matters most. Let's talk about BYU.
Okay.
How do you like their win total at 6.5?
Well, it used to be 7.5. I don't know if you knew that.
Yeah. I've seen it go back and forth.
It went to, so I think when I recommended it was 7.5 was like minus 120. And I said 7s at plus money, I think, are still good. That was one of the few bets of the independent teams that I did like. So at 6.5, it's not worth betting anymore. But let me just try to put some of what's going on into context and perspective for people. So this year, the NCAA allowed for an extra year of eligibility because of the weird COVID season last year. A lot of guys were either missing or just opted out altogether. I'm glad they did it. What kind of set up interesting with a lot of these teams that have guys going to the NFL anyway, they're not going to stay if they have the NFL in their future to play another year of college, right? Or they can go make at least hundreds of thousands of dollars, maybe millions in the NFL. So you have teams like Ohio State who only return like 51% or USC or some of the others that are, Alabama. The nation average typically in a year for returning production is 63%. This season, it's 77%. There's just been so many guys that want to come back and play an extra year of college football, which is great. What was interesting about BYU last year is they actually had a really good team and had multiple pros on the team, combined with the fact that the people that aren't pros, again, LDS culture, they're older. A lot of them serve missions. A lot of them are already married. They have families. They're like, I'm ready to go get a job. I'm not going to play in the NFL anyway. Why would I stay an extra year in college? Like other guys are partying at other schools. At BYU, it doesn't even exist really. So it does, but not too frequently. So they are at 35% returning production, dead last in the country by a massive margin. Northwestern is the next worst. Worst, I think they're 39%. And then it jumps to Ohio State, 51%. So BYU and Northwestern are so far below the rest of the pack. And why is this even important? In a typical season, that's massive because you need guys that actually have played, had snaps on both sides of the ball, returning that you can count on. Plus their schedule just gets way harder. Because of COVID, they scheduled so many cupcakes last year. And it was fun as a fan watching them beat up on teams. But honestly, it was a little bit overblown. Not to mention you have a top talent NFL draft pick in Zach Wilson gone, you have to replace. But it's this. If there was ever a season coming off of a weird COVID year where experience is going to play out the most now, prepping for another season with spring ball and after summer workouts or whatever, and you're going up against teams that just have guys that have already played so many more games than you, just so many more snaps. Like, this is the season of all time of to like basically bet on teams, at least early in the season, right, that are bringing back a good portion of their production. BYU is literally like so far below everyone else other than Northwestern, who's a little bit notch above them, that I'm not sure it's not going to take them like a month and a half to kind of get back into the swing of things. And again, they're just not as talented anyway. And they're playing a tougher schedule. You've even seen like they were plus 12, plus 11 and a half against Arizona. Excuse me. Arizona was plus 12, plus 11 and a half against BYU. And yesterday someone hit it finally. It was down to 10 and a half last I looked today. So there is some money coming in on Arizona, which makes sense. So that's kind of the rundown on BYU. But also there's a massive difference between betting under 7.5 and betting under 6.5. For me, that wouldn't be worthwhile. They still have like 5 or 6 really winnable games on their schedule. At least 5 of them, I think. And so I liked it 7 or fewer. I wouldn't play it though at 6.5 now.
Yeah. The thing that worries me with that is who knows who their quarterback really is right now. And yeah, like you said, it's all new guys, tougher schedule. Last year they're playing teams like, was it like Alabama, A&M basically? Mm-hmm. And now this year they're actually having to play Utah, a real Boise State game where they're not playing their 4th string quarterback.
Yep. Is it Jalen Hall? Is that his name?
I think it's Jaron Hall. He's the starter right now. He was awful in that game a couple years ago. I mean, that was a couple years ago. He's obviously probably gotten better now. But it's him, Baylor Romney, and then a freshman, Jacob Conover.
Yeah.
So, I mean, it's nothing to get excited about.
So Hall's like the one guy with some experience, and he runs pretty well from what I gather. But he also just is so fragile. Like they say every time he takes a hit, like something's strained and he's just not 100%. And I would bet for sure he's not playing the entirety of the season. If he's supposed to be the starter, he's going to get knocked out of a game at some point. That's just his MO. So now you're hoping that like Romney or this freshman can do it with just a lack of talent around him anyway against stiffer competition. It's just a really bad setup. It stinks as a fan. Actually, I had a family reunion like 2 weeks ago. Everyone's like, oh, you're the sports guy. Like, so what do you think for BYU this season? Like another double-digit win year? And I was just like, oh, no. Like you guys were blessed last year, no shot at double-digit wins. It's going to take a year or two to rebuild back to something we had a year ago. And they were all very disappointed. I think everyone, the anticipation as a fan is, all right, like we've worked our way up. Like we're here to stay. It's just like so remarkably wrong.
And BYU fans love to have ridiculous expectations, kind of like Tennessee fans.
It's the same.
Yeah. And then, yeah, real quick. My last question about BYU is how do you feel about Sataki?
I don't know how much blame I can put on. I'll put it this way. Until last year, I was upset. Like he hired like Detmer came in to be the offensive coordinator initially, right? Awful. Just like horrendous move, and everyone knew it ahead of time. And they were so vanilla. Like Detmer came in from coaching high school in Texas, and he wasn't even. His team was like below 500 in high school, and like okay, he's going to start calling plays for the first time in his life. It didn't add up. It was a disaster. They improved after that, and I'll admit they've been better there on that side, better than I expected at least. I'll say the other direction though, defensively. He came over from Utah. He was under Kyle Whittingham. They were really, really good defensively under Sataki at Utah, like elite. They haven't been as good as I was anticipating that to transfer over, despite playing weaker schedules and weaker offenses usually. So now how much does he really bring to the table if the defense isn't going to be like that top 20, 25 where Utah had been and that Bronco Mendenhall for years had put on the field? At least more often than not, they were an elite defense. And then he took that to Virginia, and you saw what he did at Virginia and flipped that program around. I kind of regret that it happened, but also it's one of those things where throw like the analytics or like the quantitative stuff out. Sometimes you just need a refresher and a start over and get someone new, a new face in there. So I'm extremely torn as well as like a fan. I also don't care about BYU sports as much as I used to, just on a personal level. So I'm not like following the local shows or beat writers as frequently. I'm not sure what the general perspective is or thought process is on him.
I don't think
if they struggle this year, are people going to like call for his head? Is that kind of where you think?
I have no idea. I don't think they ever say anything bad about him, do they?
Yeah, I haven't heard it. That's why I was curious then, I guess, if that was like a thing. I'm sure last year helped his situation quite a bit, and it was pretty phony as far as like their record based on who they played. I'm just not sure. Here's the other thing, because I know again you have the LDS connection. Like, who in the world are they going to get that is, keeping the honor code, that fits the school rules, that can be a better head coach in the end. Like Mendenhall and like Sataki are like two of the better options they could have had anyways over the years. I think people were calling for like Mike Leach at one point back in the day, or maybe there's a few others that are LDS that could work. I just don't know who the other option is regardless. So in the end, I think I'm just fine with Sataki just because he's the guy that's there and making things happen.
Yeah, and that's the same thing with basketball. When Dave Rose left, it's like, all right, who are you going to get? And luckily they hit a home run with Pope.
Yeah, Pope. Yeah,
but
that worked out.
All right, that's enough BYU talk. What do you got, Connor?
Yeah, so back to the ACC for a second. You talked about Miami and their win total being right around Carolina's and their rankings being about the same. So I assume Clemson's going to be top of the ACC, but on the coastal side, do you have Carolina or Miami, or what do you think is going to happen there?
I am pretty sure, I'm pulling it up. I have a separate note on my phone. For what it's worth, I bet Miami under 9.5 at minus 130 or 35. And at the time, you could get nines at like plus 105, plus 110. I'm not sure what the current number is. But they open up against Alabama.
Yeah.
And considering, I think the ACC as a whole is pretty strong. And so I was basically betting that Miami doesn't win to another next 11. And my number projection had a more like an 8 to 8.5 win team versus 10 plus. So I get the love with Derek. And here's the other thing: like you have Rhett Lashley comes in, offensive mind. They were really good offensively, but Derek King gets injured. He supposedly reports are he's good to go, he's fine, but they also rely pretty heavily on his rushing ability. One hit, he could be out again. Plus you have COVID stuff. That's just kind of an extra variable people have to care for. So Miami, I'm just kind of bearish on versus North Carolina as a whole because of the question mark there. I'm not sure their offense will necessarily be as strong. And defensively, they had the whole turnover chain run with Matty Diaz, and like it was great, but they were really fortunate with some of their takeaways and the underlying metrics. They were never as good of a defense as they really showed during some of their runs where they were getting like plus 3 or 4 fumbles in a game or interceptions. So more bearish on the Miami side. I would pick North Carolina as the favorite. I wouldn't bet them though relative to the prices. I don't think it's worthwhile to bet North Carolina or anything, but those are the two, and then it's a pretty big drop off to the next tier.
Yeah, because everybody in the ACC seems like 6.5, 7.5 wins besides Duke, who's like 2.5.
Yeah, Wake's right around there, I know, State. But I was going to say about the Miami game, Alabama's 19-point favorites last time I looked. Is that Miami's supposed to be pretty good.
That's a sucker line for Miami plus 19, I feel like.
Yeah. It's a little high. I'm like closer to like I'm under the 17, which is a relatively key number in that range, right? 2 touchdowns plus a field goal. I would bet Miami over a 17. You hate it just because it's Alabama and it just seems like they're begging for it. But when it's all said and done, I think that's the direction I would go. I will say this. I'm pulling up the Miami schedule. If I recall, they have a nice little setup where they have a bye week before they go in to Chapel Hill, at least October 16th. And it's not only a regular bye week. They play Virginia on a weekday. They have like 16 or 17 days off in a row. And then I believe North Carolina is coming off of
play Florida State.
FSU. Yeah. I mean, FSU's down, so to speak. I actually think they'll be a little better than people are anticipating overall. I think their win total of 5.5 is a little low, but the spot for Miami there against North Carolina is about as good as possible. North Carolina has to play Notre Dame the very next game after that too. Yeah. But again, I still think just slightly North Carolina deserves to be the favorite in the division.
What do you feel about the Clemson-Georgia game week 1?
I like Georgia. Again, I'm bullish Georgia, but they're out like 2 or 3 receivers and a tight end. So I don't think you can bet it now. And if they're really all going to miss, you're probably safe betting Clemson at -3. It had moved from 4.5, 5 to the 3 though, which I thought was closer to correct. And so I wouldn't be betting the game. I think fair line was closer to 3 for me, assuming everyone was healthy. Now it's probably the case that Georgia won't be offensively extremely healthy. And so I won't be surprised to see this move back up. Maybe it goes back to 4 or 4.5. If they start playing, then it might go back. It's kind of one of those things where you just have to kind of assess, read the market, keep track of the injury reports and stuff. But I would just stay away week 1 at this point.
Okay. If you had to choose off the top of your head, maybe 1 or 2 teams that you can think of that you think their win totals are either too low, or like what do you think like some of the best bets are for team totals for this year?
Tulane under 5.5, which I'm kind of playing against some of the early action there on Tulane was 5. It was juiced over, and no one was really ever going to 5.5. And then about 2 weeks ago, they did. Most books flat -110 each way. Let me pull up their schedule real quick, and I can break it down. But what happened with Tulane last year? I believe they won 4 or 5 games. It was more in a weird COVID season where they didn't play a full schedule, but they definitely overachieved. Is the main point here relative to expectation, and now they have a schedule that is just absolutely brutal. I'm gonna get there in now. All right, so they open with Oklahoma. They also, their other out of conference games they have an FCS game, but then Ole Miss out of the SEC, and I love Ole Miss this year in general. Then out of their own conference, they play the 3 best teams in the AAC, in my opinion, Cincinnati, UCF, and I think you could argue Tulsa or Memphis. Either way, they played both of them. And last year they missed Cincinnati, UCF. Just the way it broke down, they had a few cancellations because of COVID. Like they basically played the bottom of the AAC and some non-conference that just weren't very good. And I think people are like, oh, they're rushing attack. They run that weird kind of split out flex option game. And Michael Pratt was, not great through the air, but he was better than some of their other quarterbacks had been. You look at who they faced. I'm not sure how this schedule gets them to being 6 wins plus. Like Oklahoma, then they're going to win a game against their FCS opponent. I don't recall who it is. Ole Miss. I mean, those are 2 likely losses.
Yeah.
But they just have this run the back half where it's Houston, SMU, Cincinnati, UCF, Tulsa, South Florida should be a win. And then they end with Memphis. I just can't get to 6 wins. I think I think when I ran my stuff before, I had them winning 4 games even more frequently than 5, and 5's a win too. Like that's one of the bigger edges I think that I found with my numbers versus the market. That's a little more current. Some of the other ones I did like. Speaking of AAC, I liked NC State over 6 or 6.5. I know that's moved pretty heavily, but everyone loves Leary, and he was awesome when he played last year. So I like that one. I'm also pretty bullish on Utah. Speaking of some rivalries, and I know it's ugly, but over 8, and I have a ridiculous ticket. I don't know how they opened it, but just to win the Pac-12, I got like a 17-1 like 2 months ago, and like I think I even bet it again at 12-1 and 9-1, something like that. Like it's hit it 3 times. Now the 6-7-1s are I think closer to fair, but I do like Utah with. Is it Brewer? The quarterback transfer from Baylor that's taking
Charlie Brewer.
He's going to be most likely their best arm and passer they've had in years, and they're just always so stout defensively and through the run game. I actually just think their ceiling's a little higher this year than their past teams, which has already been an 8+ win team regularly under Whittingham anyway. And then one last team, TCU out of the Big 12. I kind of think they have a nice bounce back season, and their win total is 7.5. And I also took a shot on them, I believe +900 to make the Big 12 title game. The reason it's priced so crazily is Iowa State's like a top 6 or 7 team in the country, and so is Oklahoma. So it's a bet on like somehow Iowa State faltering essentially, and Texas as well. But I think it was just one of those where it should be more like 5-1, and it was 9-1. So just kind of had to bet it.
We didn't do much planning, but I wanted to ask, do you have a week 1 long shot money line? Because I have one. And
Arizona's not awful, man. If BYU is playing all these young guys that just stink, like,
yeah.
and Arizona stinks too. That's why it kind of hurts that I even am saying that as a fan. But let me pull up tell me who you like. You were about to mention it. I'll pull up the screen and
I'll give you my Morin money line pick of the week 1. Let's go with
all right.
The Raging Cajuns against Texas.
Ooh, I think that's going to be a popular one. Tell me why.
It's a little trendy. They were solid last year.
It was 12. It's down to 9 now. Spots. It's moved. Yeah.
Yeah. I like their quarterback. They were solid last year. Texas, new people coming in. I don't even think they know who their quarterback is yet, right?
I think it's going to be the guy who played the bowl game. I'm not 100% sure of his name.
So I don't know.
Here's my thing about Texas. Let me throw it back at you a little bit, because Tom Herman goes over there 1 year under his belt. It's like, okay, like now's the time. And like for the last 3 years,
Charlie Strong.
All the media, all the discussion has been, this is Texas season. Like finally, like they're ready. All their recruiting grades, their talent always tops the nation, after the maybe top tier of Ohio State, Alabama. Like they're way up in that top 10 though, every year. And you're like, okay, this is the year. And they just get hyped so much. And I love just betting against them on their season win total every year. This year, all of the discussion is, and you even said it very briefly yourself, a lot of new people coming in. It's a rebuilding year. It's going to take some time. They're not even sure who they're, it's all the talk is how now Texas needs a few years. Even the magazines, it says rebuilding year for Texas. Look, they have the talent. Steve Sarkisian, one of the best, greatest offensive minds we've seen, even at the NFL level. Crazy in his past with even at Alabama, since he had his like lapse at USC. So I think he's like changed in that regard. All power to him. And they have the talent. And they have like receivers. The kid did look really good in the bowl game last year. I'm forgetting his name, but the expected quarterback. And their schedule sets up pretty nicely. Now, they could absolutely just lose to Lafayette, who actually beat Iowa State outright last year to open the season, who was a top 10 team last year even. So they absolutely could lose this game. You could be right. But if anything, I think the market and the sentiment on Texas, I know their over is only 7.5. I'm closer to, I think I was like 8.3 projected wins. So I think the 7.5 over are actually worthwhile just because the discussion, it's just one of those like on principle, everyone's hyping the team, and a team that's so public like Texas and has such a big audience, you have to bet against them. Now everyone's saying rebuilding year for Texas. Let's see where Sarkisian has him in 3 years. Look, he's going to have him at 8 or 9 wins, I think, this year, first try. I just wouldn't be shocked to see it.
Man, you talked me out of that one.
I'm talking macro, like week 1.
Yeah, no, but
you could be right. I just, in general, I think Texas is being overlooked.
Sense.
It does make sense.
Yeah. It just kind of is like too obvious. So sometimes now you're like reversing it, right?
Yeah.
Well, it's too obvious. The thing is that people don't really think it through as deep. So I think Texas is kind of a bye team overall for me this year, but we'll know a lot right away in that first game. So it's one of those things where
I'm not looking at models and stuff like that. It's more impulsive. I'm just like,
Let me tell you real quick, because if I recall, let me pull up my numbers. It used to be 12. Is Texas playing at home or is it a neutral? Do you have that in front of you?
I don't. I can look.
I'm imagining
it's
a
at home
game for them. Yeah, there's no reason why they would agree to play a neutral.
Yeah, it's at home.
Just give me 5 more seconds. I just got to do a little bit of plugging in.
Yeah, it's in Austin.
Okay. No, I thought I liked the Texas side, but I'm only 10.1. So maybe 9 slightly low, but I can see why some people grabbed the 12, 11.5, that type of thing. So never mind. I was just trying to remember where I had it, but it's 9.5 right now, which is pretty close to fair.
Connor, sorry to interrupt. I got one more. San Jose State plus 450. What do you say?
They play USC, right?
Yeah.
I kind of like USC this year. It's also, that's the same thing you could say about Texas, where they get hyped every year and they just keep falling flat on their face. But the one thing that the difference with USC for me was, did they bring in Todd Orlando? Do you recall? Yeah, the defensive coordinator. So he actually used to be with Tom Herman at Texas, and prior to that, he was at Utah State and like crushed it defensively. And then he went to Houston with Tom Herman for a year.
Mm-hmm.
Great defensively. They had a great season. Then Herman takes him over to Texas, and the defense just, I don't know, they couldn't make it happen in the Big 12. But he goes to USC last year, and like their defense, there was like 21st in EPA success rate. They were top 25 in most of the metrics, which is great for a USC team that has Slovis at quarterback, air raid style, was scoring a bunch of points the year prior. And then they were just so awful last year in the red zone and finishing drives. And a lot of that, people will hate this, it's fluky. It's just randomness. You only have so many times you're going to get into the red zone in a season, and those samples are pretty low. You could flip a quarter 43 times and it could land heads 30 of the 43, right? Like, you kind of have to understand the whole like in a vacuum concept. But I just think in general, the offense dramatically underachieved relative to how many opportunities they had and field position to some of the other metrics. So I'm bullish on USC in general. So I'm going to say no, although I think San Jose State's going to be a really good team. They have a shot in the Mountain West Conference.
Okay. So just in the spirit of week 1 upsets that y'all been talking about, and this is more impulsive as well. I don't have the numbers and everything. Florida State's plus 9.5 right now. Notre Dame. Mackenzie Milton's supposed to start, I think, right over Travis. Is that insane for me to say that Florida State might beat Notre Dame week 1?
No, I don't think so. I'm a little bit skeptical about Notre Dame as well, just because, if I recall, I could have to pull up some of my notes, but they lost a good portion of the weapons, and then they lost Ian Book's on the Saints now, right? So they're plugging in a new quarterback. Defensively, they graded out really well. Brian Kelly's always good. Like that's where they can hang their hat. But I actually have it circled here. Notre Dame unders. Again, it's all relative to where the market ends up, coming out with some of these games and some of the prices. But that's something that early in the season, I think defensively they'll be where they need to be at. But that offensively they could really struggle. Now, Florida State isn't necessarily a team and potentially an offense that could be better than they were a year ago. I think they're both teams that I just probably am staying away from. But you said it was 9.5. It's down to 7.5 a lot of places.
Oh,
so
really?
The money's come in on Florida State. So if that's a side you liked, you seem to be on the right side of the market move. For me, I would pass. I think I would prefer to. It's weird. Anything could happen in this first game. That's just kind of how it is a lot of times, which is not a bad opportunity to take shots on money line underdogs anyway. But I would prefer to bet Notre Dame under on their season wins and Florida State over the 5.5. I think that's like you're getting the full sample of the year, and I can be more confident. That's going to be more trustworthy of what we get from these programs than just this first game, which I think is pretty wide variance, crazy. So I wouldn't bet it, but that's also a good reason, I think, to bet the money line. I don't disagree with it.
All right, I have one last week 1. What about UTSA, the mighty Roadrunners against Illinois? They're plus 7.5 money lines, plus 225.
How much stock do you put into the fact that Illinois gets to play Nebraska earlier than that? Like they get a game under their belt before UTSA.
That's where I'm serious, because I feel like that line's just going to go crazy after that first week.
I mean, it's possible Nebraska beats Illinois by 21, and then the line instead of 7, 6.5 is like 4. It all depends on that first game, but that's kind of one of those you have to, before you bet it now, I think you want to have an opinion on that first game somewhat. And the market moved on Illinois. I know that used to be 9.5 range against Nebraska, and now it's 6.5 some spots. So again, these are early openers too. The limits aren't going to be as high until the week of the games, but that's just something to note. I think it's a fine play relative to this is the vacuum spectrum. I'm pretty sure I have it personally a little bit lower. So I would lean the plus 7 side. If you can get UTSA at plus 7, I actually think that's an okay bet.
Yeah, because the only reason I mentioned that is they were in a dogfight with BYU last year, and they're a fun team to watch on a Friday night CBS network game.
Of course, yeah. Action, whatever you can get on the weeknight games, like you have to. Yeah. I'm gonna look real quick at the board. I know you wanted me to give one out that I think has a chance. To be honest, I haven't bet week 1 stuff at all, or even given any week 1 stuff out. I'm just kind of waiting for limits to rise. But one that is interesting early, other than Arizona against BYU, it goes against everything that I'm supposed to say as a local LA kid that actually believes in UCLA. But if you wanted a really long shot that maybe somehow, look, I think UCLA is supposed to be a lot better. Chip Kelly's done a fairly good job with what they've had. Defensively, they did some crazy stuff last season. I talked about it on my show if anyone was following along with that. But kind of what Chip Kelly did offensively to kind of snipe some advantages, it's kind of moved into other teams running a lot of RPO, and now it's even into the NFL a lot. They played basically the ultimate bend don't break defense like in the history of football last year. I don't know if it's repeatable. There's a very good chance that variance is not on their side. They come out against a Hawaii team that's supposed to be bad. Everyone's hyping UCLA up a little bit, and they just lose to the island team, just open the year. That just kind of feels like something that's totally possible. It also has moved from 14 to 17. So the money likes the UCLA Bruins side, but it also could be I am a Bruins fan. So it could just be that as a local kid, I'm just being kind of cautious with them. But I hope they're good this year. I think they have a chance to make a little bit of a run.
Well, Carter, unless you have anything else, that's all I had written down. I think it's all I had to start on my paper.
Random Super Bowl favorite, or who would you bet for the Super Bowl?
Oh, man, it's always for me. It's always price dependent. So let me see if I can pull up a Super Bowl odds real quick. The
Panthers at plus 5,000.
I think the Panthers are one to put the Super Bowl on. Not gonna lie.
Are you a Panthers fan, Connor?
Yeah, we both are. We're
Both
from
of us
North
are,
Carolina.
Oh, okay. Easy
Yeah.
enough. Let me ask you a question then. How do I want to phrase this? It came up today on my show that I do, and it's interesting to me. I'm a huge NBA fan, and it's I think closer and more equivalent to the Markelle Fultz forgetting how to shoot yips thing than people maybe like really talk about. I feel like it's not talked about enough. It wasn't very long ago Cam Newton won an MVP. He goes to the Super Bowl against Denver. I know there was like the shoulder thing, and in 2019 he finally had the shoulder surgery, but like he's at a point now where like he's so inaccurate, like just missing guys like the Patriots last year that you just couldn't believe. He's supposed to be able to run, but he's obviously a little more cautious. He's also older, not as athletic. But I feel like that drop off. I asked my co-host today, is the producer of the show, and he played in like the AFL and in college. And I was just like, that just seems so weird to me. Like, what actually happened at Carolina after that Super Bowl? I like that year he won MVP. Your number one receiver was Kelvin Benjamin, I think, and he was out of the league in like 3 years.
Well, he didn't even play that year. It was Ted Ginn.
He went out with ACL.
Oh, there you go. So it wasn't even Kelvin Benjamin. Like, none of these guys are worth anything a few years later. And I just maybe the fluky part of it was the MVP year and not the rest. But just to do what he did that season and then to make the run to the Super Bowl, then to say, and by the way, this actually connects to the one team I would pick that maybe has a chance that's more of a long shot in the NFL this year. But like, what happened to Cam Newton? What is your guys' take then as a Carolina fan? I wouldn't have asked this otherwise, but we just had like a 5-minute discussion today on my show. So now I'm curious.
So I'll start here. The only thing that really comes to mind is just like wear and tear. Like over the years, he got so beat up, I feel like, and maybe he just burnt out. But I dare say like the roster, the couple years after the Super Bowl year, like at least the offense was, pretty much the same, if not a little bit better. Like Kelvin Benjamin came back. He wasn't as good as he was, but like, honestly, I don't know. Carter, what do you think?
My big thing, I think it's the Super Bowl hangover thing. I would relate it to Jared Goff. What happened to him?
Okay. Well, so similarly, one of my thesis was because after you make that run, you want to keep Cam healthy. The whole premise is we're not going to run him as much or only in situations we need to. As soon as you say, especially someone that doesn't have the greatest arm, isn't the most accurate, as soon as you tell teams we're not going to run the quarterback as often, they can just defend them now through the air and like very like standardly, right? Defend the run from running backs or Cam Newton making throws. And as soon as they made those adjustments, plus maybe the shoulder injury, and he's just never been the same because he had the surgery. It's just crazy to me. But the drop off is pretty wild. But getting back to it, Ron Rivera was the coach, right?
Yes. Riverboat
comes
Ron.
back. What did Washington do last year with like Tyler Heineke, whatever his name is, comes in. They were actually the team that played the Buccaneers the closest in any of the playoff games. They win the division when no one is anticipating it. Their defense graded out number 2 in success rate against the pass in the year 2021. If you're really good against the pass, that's going to go a long way. Everyone's passing now. And they were really young, like Chase Young and all of these elite names they have on the defensive side that are under like 25, 26 years old. They're going to be really good there again. And now you bring in Ryan Fitzpatrick, who, look at his numbers last few years. I know he's not the sexiest name, but he was way better when Miami was way better on the field when he was under center versus Tua. And he's just a veteran guy that for sure over Heineke can step in, and anyone else that Washington tried last year, to be honest, Haskins and everything else. I think Washington, they were like 30-1 to win the NFC. I don't think I'd want to bet on the whole Super Bowl. I know it's come down a little bit. Their total moved from 8 to 8.5. Their division moved from like plus 300 down to plus 250, 260. But that's a team that I think I like quite a bit because they do everything really well. And I feel like there was more to Rivera in Carolina that year. They made the run and what he did with that team than maybe it was Cam Newton. As we've seen now, multiple years progressing. That's why I kind of wanted to make and have that discussion too, where maybe it was more the defense and what Rivera was doing. And now he takes over in Washington and immediately you see like the difference there. Maybe he just kind of was underrated for a while. So I'm intrigued, but I think Washington's kind of a sneaky team.
That O-line stunk at Carolina too.
No protection. There was no protection. Mike Rivers let him get destroyed in the Super Bowl.
And Mike Remmers like Patrick Mahomes get destroyed.
Yeah.
Let me ask you one more. That's a good point. Let me ask you one more question then as a fan. It didn't end up mattering, I don't think, for the game, with all of the discussion after the Super Bowl was why Cam Newton didn't jump on the fumble that was on the ground. What did you guys think of as fans there?
I mean,
are we about to get into conspiracy theories here?
Yeah, I love good conspiracy theory. Let me turn my mic.
Jericho Cotchery caught that ball, and that just changed the whole game. Yeah, Cam should have jumped on it. The game was rigged. I'll say it.
The NFL wanted Peyton Manning.
Peyton Manning was going out on top.
They wanted him to ride off into the sunset and go Super Bowl win because he was garbage in that Super Bowl. Like their defense.
It was just all defense, yep.
And we turned the ball over, twice inside our own 30-yard line or something ridiculous like that. So, Peyton Manning didn't really win in that game. We kind of lost ourselves.
Cam was weird in that game. Usually, if you watch, the NFC Championship and the game before the divisional game against Seattle, he's jumping out with the fans, all this. He was just quiet, almost looked nervous in that Super Bowl.
Almost like he got paid off.
Yeah, he might have known it was rigged. Peyton Manning needed to win another one with the new team. Yeah, all right. It makes sense coming from Carolina fans.
As a fan, that might be a sore loser perspective. But
yeah, Von Miller might have just destroyed Mike Remmers, and that's just is the nature of it.
Yep.
But, okay, I got to ask, you mentioned Ryan Fitzpatrick. How many people have come up to you and been like, hey, can I get a picture, and thought you were Ryan Fitzpatrick?
In LA area, it's a lot more Justin Turner. Fitzpatrick, but it's been both. Fitzpatrick's color of the beard,
or like the guy from Game of Thrones.
It's closer to this, yes. Right. It's kind of some blonde, but some brown, a little bit of red too. Justin Turner's is a lot more ginger than
yeah, his is straight orange.
Yeah, so I actually like the Ryan Fitzmagic comp better as far as beard goes.
Okay,
but
yeah,
I think that's all I had. Connor, anything else?
No, now I'm fired up about that.
Perfect. We'll leave you guys with that.
Just opening old wounds. No, that's all I had to. That's all the questions I had.
Hey, Preston, thanks again for coming on. This was a blast, man.
Thank you.
I'd love to have you on again, and love your show. And everybody go check it out. Where can they see it?
Sure. Yeah, you can follow me just on Twitter at SportsCheetah, and the show runs every weekday at 4 Eastern, 1 Pacific, just live there in my Twitter feed or our YouTube page, which is youtube.com/betstv. The Twitch, Facebook Live. I think we simultaneously stream at a bunch of spots, but most people are just there on Twitter following me anyway, and it plays there. And just to kind of throw it out there for people that maybe hear this and are interested, a unique take on the show is that we have a phone line, kind of like old school radio, 661-515-BETS. You can call the phone line, talk through the bets that you like for that day, and we can break them down. Or for football season, right, we'll talk about games coming up that weekend. People can lock them in, and we actually track your guys' bets over the course of the month, and we give away cash at the end of the month. We've given away $1,500 the last 2 months to the leaderboard, the guy at the top of the leaderboard. So each month we kind of run some contests for you. And it's free money. Call in, talk about your bets, and at least if you're thinking about one side, maybe I keep you clear from betting it, or maybe I agree with you and it makes you kind of
definitely
pull the trigger.
Did that today with the Raging Cajuns.
Yeah.
Oh, there you go. See, we talked it through. Now you can stay away, and there.
But all right, hey, thanks again, Connor. Anything else?
No, that's all. Just thanks for coming on. Had a blast.
No problem, guys. Take it easy.